So Ubisoft decided to give gamers another open world game, and this time they wanted to see what would happen if Breath of the Wild hopped into bed with Assassin's Creed and they had a baby. The result is Immortals Fenyx Rising, where the influences of those mentioned games is really just spewing from Ubisoft's new game in so many different areas. But as the saying goes, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, but where does the imitation stop? I'm all for games borrowing elements from other games if it gives the player a better experience, and after playing so many Assassin's Creed games and Breath of the Wild, Immortals Fenyx Rising still surprised me in how well it has come together. Sure, there are a few areas which could need a little bit of work or are too similar to other games, but then I don't think the Assassin's Creed games, whether past or present, are even close to perfect, and the same goes for Breath of the Wild, which stumbles in several areas, and to which I'm sure many would think I'm being blasphemous against. But how does Immortals Fenyx Rising stack up in the crowded open world market, and what is it like to play this first outing of a new IP? Grab a drink, slip on a loincloth, and let's dive into this tale involving Greek mythology. Let's start off with the visuals, and this game is an absolute stunner at times, with beautiful sweeping landscapes, with each area offering up a different aesthetic, but they all look completely stunning, and it all serves to deliver a world which I wanted to explore. I often find that lighting is a hugely important factor these days when it comes to being impressed with the graphics, and although the lighting is exquisite in Fenyx Rising, the art design is equally impressive. But to emphasize the importance of lighting in a game, on a side note for a second, Assassin's Creed Valhalla is a gorgeous looking game when the lighting hits the landscapes just right at certain times of the day, such as sunrise, sunset, or a completely clear day. But when the scenes aren't lit all that much, then Valhalla itself can look a little drab. The visual design, the slightly cartoon looking Fenyx Rising, which can be compared to Breath of the Wild, is excellent, and the excellence extends to whether it be the enemy designs or the huge statues based on Greek mythology you'll climb to unshroud a region similar to the towers in Assassin's Creed. Then onto the dungeon areas you'll be exploring and solving puzzles in. It all has a rich, colourful design which gels superbly with the story. The look of Fenyx Rising will most certainly give you a Zelda Breath of the Wild vibe, but where I found that game lacked in, such as a huge but mostly empty open world and dungeons which were too similar in appearance and which became extremely repetitive for myself, I enjoyed the visual presentation immensely, and no matter which direction you go in, you'll be fighting against regular enemies or legendary enemies ripped straight from mythology such as a Cyclops or a Minotaur. The game also has a performance or quality mode, and honestly I barely spent any time with the quality mode, as after beginning in performance and seeing a mostly consistent 60 frames a second, with minimal dropped frames and no stutters which I could see, I couldn't go back to a lower frame rate. One huge advantage of playing on Xbox Series X or the PS5 for example, the increase in frame rate even in large open world games as this just makes the entire experience so much better. And as I touched on earlier, the game has multiple areas with a different visual look, whether it's the more brown and rocky areas or the more lush green open fields. It all looks stunning and runs fantastic. Character models on the other hand aren't as impressive, as they do have that cartoony look about them, which is in keeping with the visual design, but they can lack a little in the expression department. But they do have personality and charm, which I found to be needed in the game with how the story and the humour plays out, which I'll get to later. Characters can also be created before you venture out, so you can give them a look which you're after, but when it comes to character creators, whether playing as a male or a female, this is on the more basic side. With only several choices in terms of faces, hair and all the rest. It's decent, but I would have liked to see a lot more options. Another technical area which must be mentioned is that the load times are extremely quick, and I can't remember a time at all where I was waiting for any longer than maybe 10 seconds, with most loading times being considerably shorter, so short to the point I couldn't even read the hints on screen. Now in terms of character dialogue, when the game started, I didn't particularly like what I was hearing, with much of it seeming to be overacted or over the top, with some questionable accents and a tone which I wasn't sure I actually liked all that much. Yet after a couple of hours, I started to forget the issues I had with it at the beginning and just accepted it for what it was. Only this time, it was exuding a charm, and when coupled with the humour, I did in fact like it. And when you take the humour, the dialogue, the mythology, and the gorgeous open world, all those parts come together really well, and they work. Music is excellent with a very memorable theme, with a beautiful mix of orchestral and classical styled music, which was a privilege to listen to, and a soundtrack which I continued to listen to whilst working on this review. It's just another example as to how far video game music has come, where we get these great pieces of music by talented musicians and composers. So we know the world is beautiful and the game is surrounded by Greek mythology, and it sounds great, but let's touch on the story. It starts with a powerful entity known as Typhon escaping imprisonment and ripping the powers away from the gods. Zeus meets up with a chained up Prometheus, who then begins to tell a tale of the only way to beat Typhon is through a mortal, and so he begins to tell the story of Phoenix, and this is where we begin to play as the protagonist. Throughout the campaign, you'll meet and interact with several people from Greek mythology, such as Aphrodite, Achilles, and others, and I found the story to be quite well done because of these famous names and a story involving them, but also how it was told. Now, how much someone likes the style of storytelling will come down to the player. When Zeus meets up with Prometheus and they start to tell the tale of Phoenix, this narration carries into the campaign as you're just exploring and completing missions. So you'll often hear them speak about events or what's happened as you're playing the game. Some may find this as light, humorous relief, which I did, but I feel others won't like it and would rather their involvement be restricted to maybe cutscenes or certain other times only. The humour I found also fit with the visual style, and I wouldn't say that it was laugh out loud funny, not much more than a chuckle here or there, but I did like it. It was at a level that was high enough to keep my interest, and the narration was something that doesn't happen in a lot of games. It wasn't something that blew me away, but really, it's not like Zelda Breath of the Wild or any Zelda game has ever delivered an incredible narrative. Even Assassin's Creed can get bogged down for various reasons as well. When it comes to the gameplay, and in particular the combat, if you've played either Breath of the Wild or the more recent Assassin's Creed games, then you'll feel pretty much at home with Immortals Fenyx Rising, with your standard light and heavy attacks, plus dodging. There is a fluidity to the combat, which has a good feel about it, and it can genuinely be a challenge in higher difficulties, where you'll need to spend resources on upgrades, making your sword, axe or bow more powerful, plus also increasing your health and stamina to go along with that too. The combat does have a satisfying feeling, especially when you defeat enemies and they get launched far off into the distance, and this never gets old. Each of the well-designed enemies will of course have a different difficulty level associated with them, but I like that there were these more mythical, harder enemies scattered around the map to be taken down, as I mentioned earlier. This is where you'll especially need to be leveled up appropriately, but also manage your stamina as well so you don't get caught out. Apart from the combat itself, you'll be spending a lot of time running, walking, jumping, climbing and flying all over the place in order to reach different resources or collectibles, or bypassing certain enemies should you think you're underleveled at the time. The climbing is very reminiscent of Breath of the Wild, and is another area where you'll need to manage your stamina or you'll be dropping all the way back down to the ground. To help with the combat and traversal, players will be able to find different armor and weapons and then upgrade the damage they can output. And these also get perks attached to them as well. So for example, a piece of armor may give you extra stamina, but one item which you'll earn very early on in the game is the wings, and of course these will let you fly. Flight mechanics are enjoyable, but also very simple, but you'll be able to nosedive or fly quicker, and all of this also drains stamina, so you won't want to be caught high up in the air either. You'll also be traversing the world and entering the dungeons where a number of puzzles await, but how much you do enjoy these will of course come down to the player. For me personally, I found these areas to be visually beautiful and liked doing the puzzles, but it was something I did grow tired of the more I invested in the game, and I felt the same way about Breath of the Wild dungeons as well. But it's still a great experience to go from exploring to combat to upgrading your gear, solving puzzles and taking on dungeons. None of it is really the greatest I've ever played, but when taken all together, Fenyx Rising really delivers a fun game when all parts come together. Now, apart from upgrading weapons and armor, you'll also be able to collect ambrosia to increase the amount of health you have, and these can be found out in the open, or complete the many vaults of Tartaros and collect Zeus's lightning in order to use to upgrade your maximum stamina. But also being a Ubisoft title, the game world is literally filled with resources and items to collect, chests are open, and puzzles to solve. At any time, players can activate Farsight, best used up at heights, and as you move your view around with the controller, it will begin to shake to symbolize you are near something of interest. It is then just a matter of hitting the right trigger to mark it on the map. If you are one to collect everything in 100% games, then you'll probably love this. But for me, I collect the things I need and use them to upgrade what I need, but endlessly running and collecting resources is something I'm not fond of, whether in this game, Assassin's Creed, or anything else. The almost endless supply of collectibles I feel can bog games down and just feels like it artificially extends the experience easily. Good for those looking for that, but it can take focus away from the main story or quest and the pacing of the entire game, especially when so many games, especially Ubisoft ones, all seem to have this in them. Players will also be using these resources and items they've collected to improve their skills and unlock godly powers, and this is by collecting yet another resource in the Coins of Charon, which are earned by completing puzzles around the world. But these activities and what are known as myth challenges is what fills the world with things to do. These aren't often a necessity, even when just wanting to upgrade weapons or your character, but it does add variety too. Once again, this can be just seen as busy work, and each player will invest various amounts of time in it based upon how much they simply like completing puzzles and existing in this world. Unlocking skills such as Apollo's arrow or a godly power such as Ares's wrath will all contribute to making your Phoenix more powerful and be able to slay more difficult enemies in more ways than when you started out. Then we have the addition of the blessings, which you'll earn by directly helping the 4 gods in the different areas of the game during the main story, and these may do things such as restoring health when low, arrows refill twice as fast, or your combo meter lasts longer before resetting. Now, one thing I'm extremely critical of with these open world games, whether it be from Ubisoft, Nintendo, or anyone else, is when they blur the line between side content and actually making it compulsory in order to progress. A recent example of this is with Assassin's Creed Valhalla and upgrading your settlement. It's directly tied to progressing the main campaign, and that's fine if it was a mission or a quest to do so. But when it involves grinding or looting for resources to continue, then that is no longer side content or for completionists. It's forcing players to partake in this collectathon when it's unnecessary and just sheer padding and filler. And I've had my fill of loot-based shooters to know when busy work is just that, purely existing to prolong the so-called experience. But when it comes to the whole package, it wasn't all smooth sailing either with Immortals Fenyx Rising, as even though the game ran and looked great, I did have 3 or 4 crashes back to the dashboard. These seemed to happen at random times, whether I was fighting an enemy, upgrading something at the Hall of the Gods, or just taking in the scenery. It wasn't something that dissipated my enjoyment of the game at all, it was more of a slight annoyance. When I loaded it back up, it seemed that no progress was lost at all, and I just continued as I would have if it had not have crashed. I was skeptical of Immortals Fenyx Rising back when it was called Gods and Monsters, and even after it had its forgettable name change. Another Ubisoft open world game, especially after the Division-ified Ghost Recon Breakpoint, but to their credit, they have delivered a beautiful and fun open world jam-packed with things to discover and puzzles to solve. It isn't the greatest narrative out there, but overall, story and connection to Greek mythology, plus the injection of light-hearted humour, really worked for me. This will be one game that will definitely get overlooked, as it came after Watch Dogs Legion and Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which released closer to the next-gen systems. But really, Immortals Fenyx Rising is my pick of the bunch, as it just delivers in so many areas, and it's just fun to be in this world. There really is nothing new here when you break it down piece by piece, and it wears its influences on its sleeve. But honestly, when we fast forward a year from now, or whenever it's on sale at a cheaper price, and the cyberpunk hype has since gone, I can see many picking this up and being impressed by the overall package. It delivers in so many areas without reinventing the wheel. But when it looks this good, plays well, and it's just a whole lot of fun, then who cares if it borrows from other games, right? Especially when it does some of those things better. So that's the review. If you liked the video, then please like, share, comment, or give it a thumbs up, as it helps a hell of a lot, and I'll see you on the next video.